Well, good morning and welcome to our presentation today, Hoping Against Hope. My name is Mark Danner, and for 30 years I've been a student of Middle East and Islamic affairs. And so it's with great pleasure and honor that I want to introduce our speaker today, Father Samir Khalil Samir. And how appropriate it is that he's speaking 3 days after the Holy Father, in his general audience at St. Peter's Square, speaking to the pilgrims gathered there, including Arab Christians, expressed his solidarity with all the persecuted of that region and asked that the Arab Christians always give reason for their hope. In the New York Encounter website, you can read a more detailed biography of Father Samir and the litany of his works and accomplishments. So I'd like to just point out 5 aspects of Father Samir's work that have moved me over the years. First, he's a great scholar. He teaches Islamic Studies at the Saint Joseph University in Beirut. But it was his rediscovery of the medieval Arabic Christian texts by theologians and writers, in many ways forgotten in Western Christianity, and his passionate, tireless effort to research and edit and catalog and make accessible these texts that really has changed the whole way that the West and East, including Arab Christians themselves, look at their heritage. In fact, in the 1970s, he established the Center for Documentation and Research in Arab Christianity in Beirut, which has continued this work and one that's shared by many, many other scholars. His books are many, but one that I would offer as a must-read to all of you is one that I often refer to as his book, 111 Questions on Islam. Second, Father Samir is a teacher and a mentor. He has taught Christians and Muslims. Hundreds and hundreds of students have risen to positions in their society and culture, including, I learned yesterday, several current patriarchs in the Arab church who wrote their dissertations under him. The story that he told that some of you heard yesterday of his incredible historic encounter with Shiite leaders in Iraq and Iran originated through an encounter with a Muslim student who even asked him to become his spiritual father without converting to Christianity, but a real encounter. Third, Father Samir is a pastor. Every summer, for many, many years, he travels to Germany and serves in various parishes in Germany. Fourth, Father Samir is a trusted advisor to church leaders at the highest levels. And to give you an example of this, he was a quiet, behind-the-scenes driving force in the organization and writing of the preliminary documents of the Middle East Synod of Bishops that comprise truly a historic work of importance, 2010, at a time that the church has been under some of the gravest threats in its history. And it culminated in Pope Benedict XVI's visit to Beirut, Lebanon in 2012, where he delivered to all the bishops the final exhortation for all Middle Eastern Christians. And it's one that I suggest that you look up and read because it's very beautiful. And fifth and finally, Father Samir is an astute and penetrating media commentator whose debates and discussions on Arab TV, on Lebanese TV with various Muslims have influenced many people's positive perceptions. He's even appeared on Hezbollah television. And to the audience here, I would commend very strongly his analysis and reports that appear in the very important website asianews.it. And some of his analyses, even from several years ago, continue to shape my understanding and have greatly influenced my thinking. So with that, let me turn it over to Father Samir.
Good morning. I hope you rest a little bit yesterday evening. Me too. And I was thinking which title could I give as undertitle to Hope Against Hope for this morning. And I thought maybe it could be Build Together an Open Society. I will explain at the end why. First, my own curriculum in connection with what we will deal this morning. I am born in 1938, went to a Jesuit school until 1955. At that time, everything between Muslims and Christians, we didn't know always who was Muslim, who Christian, in some cases. In 1948, something happened. The war, the creation ab nihilo of a state where a state existed, was already present. The state of Israel, created by the Society of Nations, in Palestine, where a people was living, the Palestinians, living since thousands and thousands of years, because the Palestinians didn't come with Islam. The Palestinians were Jews, later on Christian under the church fathers, later on Jews and Christian, and the Muslim came in 636. And it was these people. This fact, which is a great injustice for the Palestinians in the whole history, was done as a compensation to another injustice done to the Jews, mainly, essentially in Europe. And the Society of Nations, which was essentially at that time, it was not yet the UNO, was more the Western countries, decided as a reparation to give to the Jews who were French, German, Polish, Russian, and so on, from different nationalities and countries, to give the country of another people. This had changed the history, not only in the Middle East, but until now in the world. Because the other Arab countries and Muslim countries felt it was an organized aggression from the West against the Arab Muslims. Unfortunately, Muslims don't distinguish between their faith, their culture, their nationality. They put together Arabs, Islam, politics, like other religions too. By the way, I say Christianity, to my knowledge, is the only exception where religion and politics are well distinguished, even if not always well distinguished, but very well distinguished in the gospel on the mouth of Christ himself. Give to God what is to God, and to Caesar, the emperor, what is his. This is the biggest change to my interpretation we had in the Middle East. After that started the revolutions. 52 Egyptian revolution with Muhammad Naguib. 54, Gamal Abdel Nasser took the power in Egypt. Then 56, 58, revolution in Syria, in Iraq. To change, the power was in the head of some kings. It was supposed to become the power of the people. In 56, we had a new aggression, this time against Egypt. It was in the Suez Canal, the War of Suez. The reason was the nationalization of the Suez Canal. This belonged to Egypt, but Egypt did not respect the agreement with the financial agreement with France and England. And in this occasion, Israel entered also with the French and the Englander. And we had the war and the defeat. All that was a shock for the Muslims in the Middle East and elsewhere. And then we had a reaction, because the agreement of 48 and 49, what was decided by the UNO, in between it became the UNO, was not applied. It was supposed to be two nations, one for Palestinians and one Israeli. It never happened until now. And this is over 60 years, almost 70 years. This is again a great injustice. And who is supporting Israel? Globally said, is the West, what we see as a group: the United States, Canada, Europe, Western Europe. And this was such a defeat that all the Arab countries together could not do anything against a very small country, Israel, which was best organized and supported by others. Now, in 62, we had the first terroristic act from Palestinians. It was during the international football, the Olympics games in Munich, in 62 for the first time. Why? Because they thought the Arab nations will never help us, we Palestinians. The West will never help us. The UNO is not thinking about us, so we have to do it ourselves. We don't have an army, we will die for the nation. And this was seen in Palestine and in the Arab countries as a great offer from these persons who died to save the nation. I was in Cairo at that time, and I have seen first in 73 the beginning of the strong Islamization, the radical Islamization of Egypt. For the first time in 73, I was then in Minya, in South Egypt. For the first time, we have seen the girls in the school coming with a veil and with a so-called Islamic dress. And this was the beginning. Now, second point, I want to try to understand why this reaction. The historical facts I mentioned, the reaction came because for three reasons. The first one, the political reason. We had two camps for us in our area, Israel with the States and with Europe. From the other side, the Soviet Union and the socialist movement and all the socialistic states in the Arab world. There was a very important new element, a religious element. In Saudi Arabia and in the Arab subcontinent, we had a new Muslim line, Wahhabism, from a certain Abdel Wahhab. This is very old. It goes back to 1780s, the 80s, but it take form, a very popular form and a very expansive movement in the 70s, in the 1970s. The Wahhabism has a theory. They say we have to imitate Muhammad, the so-called prophet, the Prophet Muhammad in everything, in his way of dressing, of eating, of having sex, in doing war. In everything we imitate him. Because we are today the weakest of the world. If we want to be the strongest, we have to do what Muhammad did and lived. The theory is, as long as we applied the Quran and the tradition, the Sunnah, and we apply all the specific obligations of Islam, the so-called Sharia, Islam won the world, conquered the whole world. And it is true that in less than 10 years, between 732, let us say, the date of the death of Muhammad, and 640, the whole Middle East and Persia were conquered by the Muslims. So this became, this is a fact. The problem is its interpretation. The interpretation was, and is until today, because they applied perfectly the Sharia and the traditions, they won. So if we want to be the best in the world, we have to apply it. And this is the core of the Wahhabism, which is the theory of Saudi Arabia, but the whole Arab subcountry. And this was based also on a third aspect, political, religious, and cultural aspect. It is a reality that the Muslim world was, for a while, between, let us say, the 10th and the 13th century, a leading cultural power in the world, in medicine especially, but also in physics, mathematics, in philosophy. They did a lot. But I have to underline something. All that came not directly. In this period, we adopted the Hellenistic line and science and philosophy, the Greek philosophy and mathematics and medicine, and we adapted it in Arabic. But who did this? The Christians of Syria, Iraq, and a little bit of Egypt. The Syriac Christians are those who translated all what was existing in Greek, first into Syriac, then into Arabic, and transmitted it to the Arabs. And when I say Arabs, I mean Christian Arabs, Muslim Arabs, Jewish Arabs. Arabs is not a religious concept, is a cultural one. So we know that we were a leading power culturally in the Middle Ages, but we are today the last of the last, the worst. We know that. We say that daily, not to you, but to ourselves, when we are between Arabs. And we ask ourselves, what did we produce in the world? Any creation in music, literature, history, in science, in anything? Nothing. So the interpretation now of the Islamic interpretation was and is, we are the worst because we are not applying rigorously the commandments of God given in the Quran and in the Sunnah, the Sharia. And this is what we are suffering from in the whole Arab and Muslim world. It started in the 70s to spread in the Arab world. It moved to the Islamic, Asiatic world in the 80s. It came to Europe at the end of the 80s, in the 90s, and probably at that time in America. And this is a very strong movement, financed by the republics or the monarchies of Arabia with the money, supported and consciously by the Western countries for economical reasons, and deforming, creating also a radical Islam. Islam was not what we see now. In my experience, we never lived what we are living today so extremely. Islam, the Muslims say, Islam is tolerance, and it is true. It was a tolerant religion. Now, tolerance, I must say between brackets, tolerance is not an ideal. I don't want, as a Christian Egyptian, I don't want to be tolerated. I am a citizen, and I want simply to be citizen, to be considered as citizen, not as a Christian, not as a Jew or a Muslim or anything. Egyptian, point. This is what we feel daily. Now, the question is there a solution? This is the situation. As I see it, I try to develop it. Is there any solution to this situation of radical Islam? First of all, we must say that the majority of Muslims are not radical. That they are, many of them, suffering of the radicalism. Muslims used to repeat, Islam is the religion of the middle, Din al-Wasat. It's not extreme, neither too spiritual as Christianity, nor too political as the radical Islam. So they say. So the solution is to build again a Muslim thought, to reconstruct the structure of our mentality. How can we do it? It's a cultural process. We did it in the 19th century. We had in the Arab world what is called until today, always called our Renaissance, Nahda in Arabic. Who did the Nahda? Essentially, Christians from what was called at that time under the Turks, Syria, which means today Lebanon, Syria, Jordan, Palestine. The Renaissance came from these people around the middle of the 19th century. It happened in 1860 that Christians in Lebanon and in Syria were persecuted and with the war by a group of Muslims, the Druze. Some people emigrated to the Americas, Latin America and North America. Others emigrated to Egypt, which was at that moment an open society under the Khedive Ismail Pasha. They came with their culture, which was a mixture of Arab culture, Syriac culture, and Western culture. It would be a little too long to explain how the Western culture was an important factor in Lebanon especially and Syria during these centuries. But it is a well-known fact. Since the 17th century, the Christians of this area were very much acculturated with the Western culture. So they came to Egypt, and the Khedive asked them to modernize Egypt. They did it by modernizing the administration, the army, the organization of the country. They did it also by translating over 1,000 books from the Western languages, mainly French at that time, but also English and Italian, into Arabic. And they did it by the newspaper they created, a new literature, then by the banks, the economic new society. And they did the cultural revolution, which is, as I said, known as our Renaissance. So if we want to change, to build again the Muslim thought, we have to open it to other cultures, to find a new Islamic mixture, equilibrate culture. The other second point, so first, build again Muslim thought. But the second is build together a new society. Together, I mean Muslims and Christians. And I will mention an example of that, the case of Lebanon. The economy is down in many countries in the Arab world, not only since a few years, but since ever. We have to change the society, the social dimension of the society, to introduce a liberal vision of politics, to change this politics. And this is what the Arab countries tried to do 3 years ago with the so-called Arab Spring. It started in Tunisia, moved to Egypt, to Libya, to Bahrain, to Syria, and everywhere you notice that after a spring, we fall into more than a winter, in a terrible situation where, again, the Islamic radical thought is predominant. We have to change it together. Together is a very important word. It's not a question of Muslims. It's a national question. And I am a part of the nation as well as the Muslim, as the Jew, as the atheist, as anybody. It's not a religious question, but Islam as religion plays a very important role in this situation. To do whatever we do, to do it together with Muslims. Usually in the Arab area where you have Christians, the best schools usually are Christian schools. And a lot of Muslims, 30 to 50% of these schools have Muslims because they acknowledge that this is the best education possible in our country. They have not also the hospitals, a lot of things which are Christians and acknowledged as such and as good, if not the best one. So this is not to us. A Christian school is for everybody, and the majority are Muslims, so it's majoritarily for Muslims. Our Jesuit school in Cairo has today 2/3 Muslims, 1/3 Christian. This is not a bad solution, because our aim is to build a new mind, to change our country in a positive way. And all what Christians could do, we have to do it together with Muslims. The Caritas everywhere is not closed to Christians. Caritas love cannot be particular. What was asked during the Arab Spring? Liberty, democracy, equality. Liberty because everywhere we have dictators. Now we see that in Syria, we saw it in Egypt, in Iraq, in all the Arab countries of, Saudi Arabia. It could be a monarchy, it could be a so-called republic, but it's always a dictature. The only country where we don't have a dictature is Lebanon. Because Lebanon is a special case in the Middle East. Lebanon is the only Arab country which is not a Muslim country. Because Arab doesn't mean Muslim. In Lebanon, when the republic was created, Christians were a slight majority. Today, Christians are around 38, maybe 40%, no more, because of the immigration to the West and because of a lower demography than the demography of the Muslims. And the trend is going on. We will be maybe 35, 33 in the coming 10 years and so on. But Lebanon has something very special. Lebanon is an equilibrate democracy between Muslims and Christians. Everything in Lebanon must be 50-50. If you create a Christian university today, you cannot recognize it if you don't create a Muslim university in front of it. If the same for the feast, we celebrated a few days ago the nativity of the prophet. It is an unknown feast in different Muslim countries, in many Muslim countries. But why it was created? Created means it's an obligatory day where you cannot work officially. Because the Armenians asked to have their Christmas day, which is the 6th of January. So in front of the 6th of January, which is a free day, the government gave the nativity of Muhammad. It's just an example to say, in the parliament in Lebanon, although Christians are a little more than the third of the population, you have 64 Christians and 64 Muslims. And then the Christians arrange their proportion between the Orthodox, Catholics, Protestants, and so on, and the Muslims between Sunnah, Shia, Druze, and others. And this makes of Lebanon a very special country with problems, but the main trend is we are one nation. We have the same rights, whatever we are. And they are trying to give the same rights to women as to men, because this is one of our greatest problems. There are two problems for the equality. One is man-women. The other is Muslim, non-Muslims. The Sharia on this aspect is absolutely unjust. There is no equality between a Muslim and a non-Muslim. And this is from the very beginning. This was understandable, but is no more understandable in a republic. So I came to the conclusion. There is one more point. The spiritual construction of our country. And I think we have to rethink Islam as we have to rethink Christianity. But rethinking Christianity is going on since long time, and especially Vatican II and later in our days. Rethinking Islam was done in the 19th century for over 1 century, from 1860 to 1970. But now is it closed? We go back. What I mean with rethinking, starting with the Quran. If you say the Quran was dictated by God to Muhammad, who pronounced it to the people, and the generation later they wrote what they heard literally. And so we have the literal word of God. This is the official version that I expressed in Western language, but we use the same words, more or less, in Arabic. If you have this vision of Quran, then you say what we have in the Quran is the literal words of God, and it cannot be in the word something better. No gospel, no Bible, nothing could be so perfect as the words of God himself. So we have to apply it. Even if people say, but this is impossible, you have to change, not the Quran have to change. And I say the Quran has not to change, but our interpretation of the Quran. I gave yesterday a small example with cut the hand. We can interpret it as we have to eliminate what is the means to steal. And they are other means. To reinterpret the Quran was, they started to do it in the 19th century, and they closed the door, as we say in Arabic. We closed the door of the interpretation. So to open again the door. Now to the conclusion, a little bit, as I said yesterday. Our mission as Christian Arabs, as Christians in the Arab world, the first essential thing, to live the gospel. The gospel is eternal, because it's not small points you have to eat like that or to pray like that, but it's a spirit, not a letter. As it's written, the letter kills, the spirit vivifies. To live the gospel and to testify love, because God is love. This is the Trinity. When they ask me, how you say there are 3 gods? I say, we never said 3 gods. Yes, you say Father, Son, and I explain what we mean is what John says in the gospel. God is love. Love means to give. To give myself means to give birth to the Son and the Spirit. And so, if I start with Trinity, we will have discussion until the end of the word. It's impossible to explain to a Muslim, and to myself is not easy. But maybe for you it is. You belong to CL is something else. But to explain saying God is love. Love means forgiveness. This is maybe the most difficult thing to do. to forgive to the one who killed my father, my son, to forgive from my heart, 100%. It's a way. It's not something which comes so. This is our mission. And this mission means that some Muslims will ask to enter in this view, and others to become Christians. There are different steps. But this is also your mission, to live the gospel. There is no other vocation for a Christian, to testify the gospel, the love of God for us, and as God loved us, we love everybody, whatever he is or she is. Yeah. In your situation, to make a discernment in a secular city, in a secular society. This is important also for us, because if the American society, for instance, does not change to find its religious dimension, I must say in America it's already partly done. When I think at Europe, this is really something we have to fight to re-find our spirituality, religiosity, and so on. But this is your task, to maintain in the social and political decision the spirit of the gospel against a secular spirit, in the economy. And you have good steps done, but it's always to renew it. And finally, your mission is sharing with the rest of the world, sharing your culture, sharing your possibilities, financial possibilities, sharing your vision of the world, sharing your ideal. This is our task, yours and mine. You do it in your society, which is originally Christian, but not only, and going sometimes far away from the gospel. Me, in the Muslim society, which is far from the gospel thinking, we have to make them closer to the spirit of the gospel in everything. We have a common task, and this is beautiful. We can share it, as to live the gospel, to testify it personally and as a community, not only as a personal choice. It starts with something personal, but it must be, if we want to change the society, not only myself. It has to be a social project and a political project. Religion and politics in this meaning goes together, in the meaning that Benedict XVI clarified when he spoke about positive secularism, in the meaning that there is a spirit which is from the gospel, and there is a body, the structure of the society, which is from the society. I hope we could give this testimony. I know this is your aim, and this is mine. This is the most beautiful mission God could give us, to be testimony of the gospel. Thank you.
So, a couple of things to conclude, but first I'd like to share with you, Father Samir, then a dream of mine, that someday, soon I hope, that we can look out into the audience here at the New York Encounter and maybe see some of the Iranian imams that you met, or some of the Egyptian Muslims that you know, and that we can share our experience.
I hope so. Okay.
We'd like to invite you to read and share and sign this appeal for persecuted Christians that's on your chairs. It's a petition in support of our brothers and sisters, but it makes a point that's very critical, that the existence of Christians in the Middle East and throughout the world is an antidote to the intrusion of power that Father Samir spoke about. And so defending the rights of Christians really means defending the free life of everyone. So please sign it, and we will present it to the United Nations. It's already been a petition that's been circulating in Europe, and tens of thousands have signed it. Now we're going to watch a, oh, by the way, we're going to watch a video, short video, that was filmed in a refugee camp, Marj el-Khouch, in Lebanon, on September 7th, which, as you may remember, was a day of prayer throughout the world that Pope Francis called for support for the persecuted Syrians, Christians and Muslims, for the suffering Syrians and Muslims. And this video was taken in a camp that is receiving aid from AFSI, an international aid organization. And it was an event between Muslims and Christians in the camp, Syrians and Lebanese. So let's watch this video.
Questo è un bambino del campo profughi di siriani a Marj el-Khouch. Sono siriani in fuga da Idlib. Questo ragazzino sta leggendo una sura. È l'adesione del campo dei profughi siriani di Marj el-Khouch alla giornata di preghiera per la pace di Papa Francesco. Ci sono il sindaco di Marjayoun, il leader sunnita della regione e un prete cattolico. Si sono raccolti intorno ai profughi gli insegnanti delle scuole. Se sarai orfano, il Signore ti soccorrerà, se disperato ti verrà incontro, recita la sura. C'è la comunità di Marjayoun stretta intorno ai fratelli siriani. Rivolgo un appello forte per la pace, un appello che nasce dal più profondo del mio cuore. Sono le parole di Papa Francesco, quelle che legge lei. E persino i militari che ci hanno chiesto 1000 permessi per filmare al confine, ora sembrano più quieti. Un minuto di silenzio, un applauso per gli oltre 100.000 che la tragedia siriana ha inghiottito. Lei dice che ha dato il figlio prediletto a Bashar al-Assad, darebbe ancora il suo sangue per lui, scrivetelo su Al Jazeera, su Al-Arabia. Ma i più sono stanchi di propaganda e parole di sfida. Come questa donna. Il marito è andato a prendere le verdure nel campo e non è più tornato. I suoi figli, il più piccolo ha solo pochi mesi.
Questo è il loro principale desiderio, che non succeda nulla di più grave di quello che già sta succedendo.
Marjayoun, Bin Jebel, Khiam, snocciolammo come i grani di un rosario 7 anni fa i nomi della battaglia tra l'Hezbollah e Israele. In questa terra brulla dove le tragedie si stratificano. In questa terra brulla che non vuole altre guerre.